Cloudsuck and getting sucked up into a thunderstorm are some of the scariest possible ways to die paragliding. Today, I'm going to review a video from YouTube and teach you everything I know about staying away from the clouds and surviving when thunderstorms are in the area. Ready? Here we go.
See ya.
I'm paragliding!
See ya! Hey everybody, this is Ari. Welcome back to the channel. Stoked you're here. If you've never been here, welcome. My name's Ari. I make videos here on YouTube to try to help you have better paragliding outcomes and share my experiences with you. I also am the founder of the Paragliding Men's Group, and I founded that so that I could help you have better outcomes in your personal, relational, and just the rest of your life when you're not flying. So check those things out. We've got another cohort of the Paragliding Men's Group starting very soon. So today I'm going to review this video that was sent in by a subscriber. His channel is Jerry and he makes wonderful videos, and the video in question is totally awesome. You should definitely watch it. Let's get into it. He sent me a version of it that doesn't have his commentary, and I'm just going to go through it and point out some of the things that I think and that I think about and that I know about this kind of situation. It's something that I've dealt with before in paragliding. And in general, when you watch the video, you can tell the pilot is quite experienced. He's talented. He's flying a two-liner. He has his head screwed on quite well. And he makes a couple of comments in his video about the mistakes that he thinks he made. I think these are really valuable. So I highly recommend you watch the video. I'll put the link in the description below, and I'll cover a couple of those things that he said, and I'll add a few more here. Okay, so he launched here and he's climbed out, and honestly, it's a relatively benign start to the flight. And as I scrub through, you can see this clouds are forming over the terrain here past his arm. This is Slovenia, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, but don't quote me. It's been a little bit since I've communicated with Jerry about this video. Anyways, launch is up here near this clearing in the trees. And he said that there was some potential for overdevelopment in the forecast. And this is the first thing I want to talk to you about. If you're trying to avoid being sucked into a thunderstorm or getting rained on or dealing with a gust front, all these things are various hazards for flying around clouds that get too big. The best thing to do is check the forecast and not fly when there's a chance of overdevelopment in the forecast. And this is not something that I always do. I have historically kind of toyed with this danger in my own flying. And in general, these days, I'm a bit more cautious and conservative about what days I fly based on the potential of development. So I love flying on days that have clouds. It's easier, faster, more fun, more beautiful. One of the most spectacular things you can experience in paragliding. But if they get too big and they want to suck you up and it's going to rain and it's going to gust front and all of these things, it's really something I'm trying to avoid these days. So really just checking the forecast and just finding something else to do on the days where there's a considerable chance for overdevelopment. And what I mean by a considerable chance, I think, typically I have access to about 5 or 6 weather models, forecasting models for my local area. And if one model thinks there's a 20% chance of thunderstorms and no other model thinks there's a chance for thunderstorms, then I'm going flying. That's not a big deal. But if 3 models think there's a 20% chance of thunderstorm, then you really have to start questioning it. If every model thinks that there is any chance of thunderstorm, then it's probably a day to stay home. But to each their own, and paragliding risk, tolerance, experience, all of these things vary so differently between us. So I can't really give you any hard and fast rules about what is flyable and what is not. Personally, I've flown through hail, I've flown through rain, I have run away from thunderstorms. Even this season, I basically flew a 260 kilometer route where I was like threading the needle between 2 big overdevelopments. And I stayed plenty clear of both of them. And as you paraglide, another thing that you want to that should be noted is that a paraglide pilot flying in the sky actually has a pretty good finger on the pulse of what's happening in the sky for the day, what is growing, what is developing, with the caveat that vertical development, like how tall the clouds get, how deep they get, is one of the most relevant types of development and can be very hard to discern from below the clouds. If you're really far away, you can see the clouds have gotten tall, but if the clouds are over your head, then you don't really know how tall they are. And so that's something that you really want to keep in mind. So in general, I think that this pilot in question, Jerry here, is quite experienced. He's a good pilot. He's flying a 2-liner with his buddy on an Enzo. And he also makes a wonderful video that is very entertaining, and it makes my heart pump because he uses great dramatic music, and he also outlines the hazard of being sucked into a cloud and what thunderstorm hazards are. And it's a great video, super entertaining. So there's a couple things. The first thing that I remark on is the forecasting. So obviously our weather forecasting these days have gotten so good. And if you want to avoid thunderstorms, then you can avoid it altogether by never flying on days where there's a chance of thunderstorm. Simple as that. The second thing that Jerry mentions in the video, and looking here, like he overlays his track log onto where the clouds developed, and this is a very useful thing. And it looks like where he flew, he basically bounced around in the fishbowl, and then he lives somewhere in this region up here on the top right. And at some point, he makes a decision that it is in fact time to land, that the development is getting too big, and he decides to make things easier for him, is what he says in the video, and he ends up flying under the clouds, over the terrain, and towards his home. This is where I think he makes, I don't want to say a mistake, because obviously he landed safe, but if you are in the situation that clouds are developing very rapidly and you want to avoid this, I would suggest that you fly directly away from the clouds, perpendicular to them. In this case, you can see here that the clouds were developing along the terrain. So instead of flying along the terrain, you fly out into the flats. You get away from the triggers that are working the best for the development. You fly directly out into the flats and find a safe place to land. Use descent techniques, find sink, drogue chutes, deep stall, tail slides, spirals, whatever it is that you use to get down, and you get down and you land safely. What Jerry does here is makes a decision between safety and convenience. And this is something that for me has been really, really a super dangerous part of my own paragliding. I love convenience. And if I die paragliding, then I've always told my friends that it will be because I stuffed it into some green grass landing field that was too tight to land in. So I am a sucker for green grass. I live out here in the high desert where Jerry lives. There's green grass landings everywhere. So my point here is that you're going to have to make decisions based on your safety versus your convenience. And Jerry makes this decision to fly over the terrain, under the big clouds, as a way to keep himself closer to home, shorten his retrieve, all of these things, which is something that is, we're all susceptible to. In general, I think that Jerry looks back on that decision as a mistake, and that he would have rather flown out into the flats and avoided the terrain and gotten a ride or walked or whatever it was, so that he avoided dealing with what he dealt with, which, as you look here, also just like his video is so good, man, and how he has this GoPro recorded so that shows the telemetry of the lift and the ground speed, the altitude, the heading is like just so good. He makes better paragliding videos of his own flights than I do. So let me scrub forward here. He at some point he gets into like some pretty strong lift along the cloud, and he kind of skirts the cloud. He uses the 45 rule. These are all things I've talked about in the channel. So if you really want to know about cloud flying, I've made some good videos about that. But in general, he makes the decision to fly over the terrain and towards his home. I think that's a mistake. I'm not saying that I look down on him for that, or I wouldn't have done the same exact thing in my own case. I'm not the safest pilot on the planet, just so you know. Do as I say, not as I do, more often than not. My next point is on how to actually run from cloudsuck and or cloud development in general. I think I've already mentioned that, in this case, the clouds were developing along the ridge. And if it were me, I would run directly perpendicular to them out into the flats and not fly over the terrain features that are really working the best. That's a good way to run. Also, at some point during the video, he tries to work his cell phone. Here you can see. And he's trying to pull up the weather radar here. and he's using windy. This is a decent idea. The problem is that, as he's mentioned a couple of times in the video, this stuff, like the sky closes in a matter of 15 minutes. So things are actually developing really, really quickly. Also, having lots of experience looking at the radar and paragliding, I can tell you that the only things that show up on the radar is when it gets really, really, really tall, like thunder and lightning and rain. And it's also somewhat slightly delayed. So I think that your best bet here, if you have the thought in your mind of, oh, I need to land here, then do nothing except getting yourself to the ground to a safe landing. Don't look at the radar. Don't futz with stuff. Obviously, this is one of the ways that I can tell that Jerry is an experienced pilot, because he knows his way around his phone in this way, and he can deal with it when he's flying and yada, yada. So that's another thing I wrote down. The terrain, staying away from the terrain, that's really working. As far as what the wind is doing, it's hard for me to say. I'm not exactly sure what the wind was forecasted or exactly how the wind was blowing. I kind of assumed that it was blowing up towards launch, like out of the flats and onto the mountains. In that case, I probably would push headwind there, because you were pinned in by the terrain and the clouds behind you. So running downwind wasn't really an option. He ends up doing that. And that's going to lead me into my next point here. We'll scrub through the video, and you see that he goes over the back and under the clouds and tries to make a run for his home. So looking at this map here, you can see that he flew out to the north, and then he actually flew back to the south, and then to the west towards his home. And that leads us to the next part of his video, where he actually finds himself flying into a lot of wind. Okay, so now we're going to talk, instead of talking about thunderstorms here, we're actually now talking about cross-country landings, flying in a ton of wind, and getting down safe when the conditions are no longer safe for you to be in the sky. He does talk about flying at full speed and his ground speed. There's no way for me to actually know how. I can't really tell, and I'm not super versed in his glider, but full speed is not where the pulleys overlap. It is where the limiter straps engage on a two-liner. So making sure that your limiter straps are tight when you're pushing what you think is full bar. That is the measure of full bar, and you want to make sure that your glider is set up properly before you fly it for exactly this instance. If you can, using a harness simulator, adjust your glider or adjust your speed bar so that you can get an extra 2 or 3 kilometers an hour out of it on full speed, it really can make a difference in situations like this, not just racing and flying cross country. You always want your equipment really as dialed as you can possibly make it for safety and for enjoyment and peace of mind. So that's one thing. I kind of intuit that Jerry, just seeing, kind of watching his videos, I kind of think he's pretty dialed. He's like got his stuff pretty organized. And so I would not be the least bit surprised if his kit was totally dialed. But I did want to make note of that and recommend that you think of your speed bar as a very important piece of your safety equipment on board. So taking that very seriously. Basically, the long and short of this is that Jerry flies into a lot of wind. He finds himself in a ton of headwind, and he's basically not going anywhere. In this frame, we can see, 10, 12 kilometers an hour ground speed while his pulleys are touching here and he's at full speed. So a lot of wind. He ends up turning downwind and starting to run a little bit and run with the wind to find himself a safe landing. In this instance, I think that this is where I have my strongest moment to teach you what I think about this kind of thing. I have landed backwards a number of times in paragliding, a lot of times chasing distance, a lot of times just flying in the desert. It's like, can get really windy here. So this is something I've dealt with. Let's scrub forward, and I'm going to point out a couple of spots in his video where I thought that I wanted to take note. So also, I just want to give the pilot credit here. There's really no way for me to know exactly this place, and I am just watching his videos, so there's only so much information that I have to make these suggestions. So don't take this as that I'm condescending here. These are just the things that I think about, and I have limited information to make this, but I think my points are sound here. If you look, this is the arena in which he flies into, and I think that right here, what I'm highlighting with the mouse here is actually the field that he ends up landing in. He flies right over this, which looks like a little bump, a terrain bump, right? This looks like a low point here. This looks like a piece of terrain that pops up. The forest pops up right here. This is like kind of a high point. So what I want to invite you to consider is if you knew that you were going to land either at your trim speed or stronger, if you were going to land backwards, where would you want to land in regards to terrain, objects that can create turbulence or rotor of any kind? And with that in mind, I think I would want to land on high ground, not low ground. I would want to land on a slope that the wind was blowing up, not right behind the slope. So he ends up flying over this, this bump that I mentioned. And here he does a 360 on it. And he remarks with his shadow that he had such a low ground speed.
Shit, the wind is blowing hard.
He says, oh shit, the wind is blowing hard. Yeah. So as we get a little closer here, we can kind of see he does end up landing in this grass field right here. And the wind is somewhat at his back right now, or at least like cross. And so I kind of imagine that this is not the place that I would want to land. It's hard for me to tell exactly watching the video, like which way the wind is blowing. So I am kind of inferring some stuff. So bear with me and try to take the point for what it is instead of what exactly happened here. Like I said, this little bump, let me find the place. Okay, so this is a good view of it. So this little bump that's right behind his carabiner, lots of big grass fields and upslope, meaning that the wind is going to be blowing up this. And even if the wind is strong, I can set up my landing approach in front of it, and I can try to find myself landing on a downhill slope with the wind blowing up it. This is tricky. It might be adding a layer of complexity as far as the terrain feature, but it almost eliminates completely the rotor factor. That's what I'm trying to eliminate. I want to land somewhere where I know there's clean air. That's the most important thing to me. Because as Jerry mentions, as he goes downwind to this feature, he says that there's rotor. And I think the rotor is coming off of this set of trees here, where there's probably only a 30 or 40 meter tall piece of terrain and then some buildings behind it. When the wind speeds are, 40 kilometers an hour, it doesn't take much terrain to make rotor. So you really want to steer clear of that. So as we scrub forward, I'm just noting my notes here. Really big landings and landing fields that are very clear upwind, meaning that there's not a big buildings, that there's not big trees, that there's no terrain features. That's my first priority. If I'm in a really high wind situation and I'm looking for landing options, that's the first thing I'm going to consider is like, what has the cleanest air to land in? So as he comes into land here, let's go forward to the landing, forward. Okay, so this field here is where he ends up landing. There's corn on one side of it, and then the other is grass. And this here, as we see, this is a sloping treed hilltop, and I think that the wind is coming over that, and it creates the rotor that Jerry mentions as he comes in over the corn, and he mentions that he feels rotor. He puts some big brake inputs to keep the glider open. And I want to address something. So when you watch this video that he created, it's wonderful. And he uses great pacing and music, as well as information about what is dangerous about flying around thunderstorms to really put the viewer on edge. And as a pilot, one of your biggest hazards is going to be your fear. So if you get really scared that the clouds are developing too much, you can actually start fixating on this and you can overreact and find yourself in a state where you don't fly very well, like your hands don't work that well, controlling the glider, these kinds of things. And I think that happens here on Jerry's landing, because if we come in here, I kind of make the assumption that he's a relatively talented pilot, and watching his landing, he's saying rotor, rotor. He's got his feet out of his pod, as he should. As you can see here, I'm going to pause the video. You can see that the buildings on the right It's a big slope up to the right. So he is landing directly in the lee of the wind that he was pinned in. So this is really not a super great place to land. And watch as he comes in, he's saying rotor, rotor, rotor. He's controlling the glider. And then what happens right here? He crashes, which doesn't hurt him. He gets drugged a little bit by the glider. And the reason that he crashes here, as far as I can tell, is because he's afraid, and his fear stops him from doing what? Flaring. Look at the trailing edge of the glider in the shadow here. You should see a big change in the pitch and in the ground speed and in the shape of the glider in the shadow, and you don't see any of that. So I think that when you're in scary situations, as much as I can tell you knowledge about how I would think about that, the most important thing is to regulate your nervous system in those instances. And this is just such a ubiquitous hack for the rest of your life. It's like if you get into a conflict with your partner, if you have to deal with stressful situations in your job, with your parenting, with your friends, all of these things come down to like how well you are going to respond in these situations is basically how well you can regulate your nervous system. So if you're in a scary situation paragliding, like using breath techniques and really putting a lot of attention on the quality of your thoughts and just how you're feeling. It's not like you have to recognize that paragliding is one of the scariest things that you can do. It is deeply somatically triggering. It's like really a scary thing. So especially in a situation like this, where there's an objective hazard that you've been trained as a pilot to avoid that now you're having to wrestle with, even though you're experienced, you can let yourself get overly indexed on the fear and the hazard, and you end up just like making decisions or making mistakes where you just don't flare the glider and you kind of have a, in this case, non-consequential small crash. But my point here is that it's a scary sport. One of the most fundamental skills that you can develop as a paraglide pilot is nervous system regulation, knowing how to calm yourself down, knowing how to like keep your head screwed on right when things get stressful, when things get dangerous. It's the same thing in your relationship when you start fighting with your partner. Having nervous system regulation, conflict resolution, communication skills. These are all things that we talk about in the Paragliding Men's Group. If you're interested in that, there's a link in the description below. We would love to have you. But all things considered, even with the small grass stains on his knees here, Jerry does a great job of keeping himself safe and getting to a safe landing. And he makes an amazing video that does us all a service. As he mentions in the video that looking back at the clouds now, it didn't actually culminate into a full-on thunderstorm that produced hail and lightning, but it definitely developed quickly enough that it warranted his landing. And I think he did a good job of helping us see how fast things can develop. Clouds can develop so much faster than we realize. And in general, in the worst case, they can actually develop horizontally faster than you can fly your glider. This case shows us that in 15 minutes, the sky can pretty much close up and become entirely clouded and with very dark bottomed tall clouds. These are things you very much want to avoid, and always indexing for conservative safety decisions rather than your distance outcomes or your recreation is always a sound decision. So I hope this video helps. Thanks so much to Jerry for sharing it and for re-exporting in a way that we could share on this channel. I highly recommend that you watch the video because I didn't play much of it here. Safe flights, everybody. Look out for those big thunderstorms. We'll see you on the next episode. Cheers.